March 8, 2014 started like any other day in the world of aviation. At 12:42 in the morning, Malaysian Airlines Flight MH370 rolled down the runway at Kuala Lumpur International Airport, ready to begin what should have been a routine 6-hour journey to Beijing. The Boeing 777 had had a nearly spotless record in commercial aviation, making it one of the safest aircraft in the sky. The massive twin-engine jet was carrying 239 souls that night, 227 passengers and 12 crew members, including flight attendants and pilots who trusted this reliable aircraft with their lives. At the controls sat Captain Zahari Ahmed Shah, a 53-year-old veteran pilot who had become one of Malaysian Airlines' most experienced captains. For the first 20 minutes, everything proceeded exactly as planned. The massive jet climbed steadily into the night sky, following its predetermined flight path toward Beijing. Air traffic controllers monitored its progress as it crossed Malaysian airspace, and all systems appeared to be functioning normally. At 1:08 a.m., the aircraft crossed the Malaysian coastline and entered the airspace above the South China Sea, heading toward Vietnamese territory. This was standard procedure for flights traveling to Beijing. Captain Zahari radioed the control tower, reporting that the plane was cruising at 35,000 feet with all systems operating normally. Nothing in his voice or the aircraft's behavior suggested any problems. About 11 minutes later, the airplane approached the boundary where Malaysian Air Traffic Control would hand over responsibility to Vietnamese controllers. This handoff process happens countless times every day around the world and is usually seamless. The Air Traffic Control Tower in Kuala Lumpur radioed the aircraft with standard instructions. Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night. Captain Zahari's response was calm and professional. Good night, Malaysian 370. These words, spoken in a routine tone, would become some of the most analyzed phrases in aviation history. They were the last confirmed communication anyone would ever receive from MH370. Up to this point, nothing seemed unusual. The flight was on schedule, the weather was good, and both pilots were experienced professionals. But within moments of that final radio call, something unprecedented happened. The disappearance. Just 30 seconds after Captain Zahari signed off from Malaysian airspace, Flight MH370 simply vanished from radar screens. It was 1:21 a.m. and one of the most advanced aircraft in the world had become invisible to the systems designed to track it. The Air Traffic Control Center in Kuala Lumpur initially didn't notice anything wrong. When planes move from one country's airspace to another, it's normal for them to disappear from one radar system before appearing on another. Controllers assumed MH370 had simply moved beyond their radar range and was now being tracked by Vietnamese air traffic control. However, the Vietnamese controllers were seeing something very different. While they had detected MH370 entering their airspace, the aircraft disappeared from their radar screens almost immediately. They tried repeatedly to establish radio contact with the plane, but there was no response. The aircraft had gone completely silent. The Vietnamese controllers spent 18 minutes trying to reach MH370, following standard emergency procedures. When their repeated attempts failed, they contacted Kuala Lumpur to report that the aircraft had vanished. This should have triggered immediate emergency protocols. According to international aviation rules, when an aircraft disappears, the Aeronautical Rescue Coordination Center should be notified within 1 hour to begin search and rescue operations. But communication breakdowns and confusion about which country was responsible for the aircraft caused critical delays. It wasn't until 4 hours after the disappearance that emergency response teams were finally activated. By 6:32 a.m., the time when MH370 should have been landing in Beijing, airport officials knew something was terribly wrong. The aircraft had never arrived, and there had been no distress signals or emergency communications. An international search operation was launched immediately. The search began in the most logical place, the South China Sea, where the aircraft was last seen on radar. This vast body of water lies between Malaysia and Vietnam, directly along MH370's planned flight path to Beijing. If the plane had crashed shortly after disappearing from radar, this would be where wreckage should be found. The search effort was massive and international in scope. 34 ships and 28 aircraft from 7 different countries converged on the South China Sea. Teams from Malaysia, Vietnam, China, Singapore, Thailand, the United States, and Australia joined forces to comb through thousands of square miles of ocean, Advanced sonar equipment, underwater cameras, and satellite imaging were all deployed in the search. But after days of intensive searching, no trace of MH370 was found. No wreckage, no oil slicks, no debris fields, nothing that would indicate where a massive Boeing 777 might have crashed. The aircraft seemed to have simply vanished into thin air. 4 days after the disappearance, on March 12th, Malaysian officials revealed a stunning piece of information that changed everything. While civilian radar had lost track of MH370 over the South China Sea, military radar had continued to track an unidentified aircraft for much longer. According to these military radar readings, an aircraft matching MH370's characteristics was detected at 2:22 a.m., more than an hour after the plane had disappeared from civilian radar. But this aircraft wasn't flying toward Beijing or crashed in the South China Sea. Instead, it was located near the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, flying north above the Strait of Malacca. This location was hundreds of miles west of where MH370 should have been, in completely the opposite direction of its intended destination. The plane appeared to have made a dramatic course change and was heading toward the Indian Ocean rather than toward China. The implications were staggering. Had the aircraft been hijacked? Was there a mechanical failure that caused the pilots to attempt an emergency landing? Or had something else entirely happened that forced the plane to change course so dramatically? Several days later, investigators uncovered another crucial piece of evidence that deepened the mystery. Satellite data revealed that MH370 had been attempting to communicate with orbiting satellites for hours after it disappeared from radar. This discovery was significant because modern aircraft like the Boeing 777 are equipped with automatic communication systems that regularly connect with satellites. These systems work similarly to how a smartphone automatically connects to known Wi-Fi networks when they're in range. The plane's communication equipment was trying to establish connections with satellites, even after all other contact had been lost. However, these satellite communications contained a frustrating limitation. While the satellites could detect that MH370 was trying to connect, the system only recorded basic connection attempts. No specific location data was transmitted, so the satellites knew the plane was still flying and trying to communicate, but they couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was. This revelation meant that MH370 had continued flying for hours after disappearing from radar, but its exact location remained unknown. The aircraft was somewhere out there, still airborne but invisible to conventional tracking systems, and unable to communicate its position to the outside world. The discovery of these satellite communications transformed the investigation. It meant that MH370 hadn't crashed immediately after disappearing from radar. Instead, it had flown for hours in an unknown direction, carrying 239 people into one of the greatest mysteries in aviation history. Scientists and investigators realized they could use these satellite communications to approximate the aircraft's location. The key breakthrough came when they understood that when the satellite received communication attempts from the aircraft, it would automatically point its antenna toward the plane's direction. By analyzing the angle of the satellite's antenna and the time it took for signals to travel back and forth, they could estimate where MH370 might have been during each communication attempt. While the exact location couldn't be determined from these satellite signals, the data was precise enough to create what investigators called ping rings, or distance arcs. These appeared as large circles on maps showing all the possible locations where the aircraft could have been when it tried to communicate with the satellite. The plane attempted to establish communication with the satellite 7 times through what became known as handshakes, creating 7 distinct circles on the search map. Each circle represented different times when MH370 systems automatically tried to connect with the Inmarsat satellite orbiting above the Indian Ocean. These satellite handshakes were completely automatic. Just as a smartphone continuously searches for cellular towers or Wi-Fi networks, the aircraft's communication system kept trying to establish contact with satellites, even when the main communication systems had failed or been disabled. This proved to be the most crucial evidence in the entire investigation. The 7th and final circle was enormous, covering vast areas of Kazakhstan in the north to the southern Indian Ocean near Australia. The aircraft could have been anywhere along this arc when it made its final communication attempt. This circle stretched across multiple countries and thousands of miles of ocean, making it one of the largest search areas ever considered for a missing aircraft. The seventh Ark discovery. After extensive calculations involving the aircraft's speed, remaining fuel capacity, and flight time, investigators were able to narrow down the search area significantly. The area was so isolated that it was beyond the range of most shipping routes and far from any land-based radar systems. It was, in many ways, one of the most challenging places on Earth to conduct a search operation. The seventh Ark became the focus of what would become the most extensive and expensive search operation in aviation history. Maps showed the satellite's position used for calculations, along with the maximum range the aircraft could have traveled with its available fuel supply. The curved red line marking the seventh Ark represented the most likely crash site based on all available evidence. Multiple search operations were launched to cover the vast areas indicated by the satellite data. The yellow regions on search maps showed where teams concentrated their efforts, with the orange priority area receiving the most intensive searches. These operations involved ships, aircraft, and eventually sophisticated underwater vehicles from multiple countries. By April 2014, it became clear that surface searches would be futile. If MH370 had crashed into the ocean, the aircraft would have sunk to the ocean floor rather than remaining on the surface. The focus shifted to deep-sea exploration, using advanced sonar equipment and underwater vehicles to scan the ocean floor thousands of meters below the surface. This deep-sea search became the largest and most expensive ocean search operation ever conducted. For weeks, months, and eventually years, teams scoured the ocean floor looking for any trace of the Boeing 777. The operation involved cutting-edge technology, including autonomous underwater vehicles equipped with high-resolution cameras and sonar systems. After 3 years of intensive searching and an expenditure of $160 million, the official search operation was called off in 2017. Despite covering over 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor, no trace of the main wreckage had been found. The operation was officially deemed unsuccessful, leaving families and investigators without answers. However, there was one significant breakthrough during this period. In July 2015, the first confirmed piece of MH370 debris was discovered on Reunion Island, located east of Madagascar in the western Indian Ocean. A local resident found a large piece of aircraft wreckage washed up on the beach, which was later identified as a flaperon, a movable wing surface from a Boeing 777. This discovery was crucial because it proved that MH370 had indeed crashed into the Indian Ocean, and ocean currents had carried debris westward toward the African coast. The flaperon showed signs of being in the water for an extended period and proved physical evidence that the aircraft had broken apart upon impact with the ocean. The location of this debris discovery was consistent with the satellite data analysis. Computer models of ocean currents showed that debris from a crash site along the seventh Ark could realistically drift to Reunion Island over the course of 16 months. In 2018, Ocean Infinity, an American marine robotics company, signed a new contract with the Malaysian government to resume the search. Their proposal was unique. They would conduct the search at no cost to Malaysia unless they successfully located the aircraft. This no find, no fee arrangement demonstrated their confidence in their advanced technology. Ocean Infinity brought revolutionary underwater search capabilities to the operation. They deployed up to 8 autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs, capable of operating in water depths from 5 meters to 6,000 meters. These robotic vehicles could work simultaneously, covering much more area than traditional search methods. During their search operation, Ocean Infinity made remarkable discoveries about the ocean floor itself. Using multi-beam sonar to map underwater terrain and sub-bottom profiling sonar to penetrate the seabed, they revealed a landscape few had ever seen. The area around the seventh Ark contained numerous underwater volcanoes, deep trenches, steep cliffs, and underwater mountain ranges. This underwater mapping revealed just how challenging the search area was. The ocean floor was not flat, but filled with complex geological features that could easily hide aircraft wreckage. The terrain included deep valleys where debris could be scattered, and rocky formations that could obstruct sonar signals. Despite their advanced technology and months of searching, Ocean Infinity's mission also ended without success. Their sophisticated equipment had mapped thousands of square kilometers of previously unknown ocean floor, but MH370 remained elusive. With the physical search yielding limited results, investigators turned their attention to the human elements of the mystery. They conducted extensive background checks on every passenger aboard MH370, looking for any connections to terrorist organizations, criminal activity, or other suspicious behavior. The investigation also focused intensively on the flight crew, particularly the two pilots. Investigators examined their personal lives, financial situations, psychological states, and any potential motives for deliberately diverting the aircraft. This process involved cooperation between multiple intelligence agencies and law enforcement organizations. Several theories emerged about what might have happened to MH370. Investigators first considered how the aircraft could have disappeared from radar so completely. The possibilities included electrical failure that disabled communication systems, mechanical accidents that caused catastrophic damage, technical malfunctions that rendered equipment inoperable, or deliberate action by someone aboard the aircraft. The investigation revealed that someone would have had to manually disable the aircraft's transponder, the device that allows air traffic control to track planes and identify them on radar screens. This action could have been performed either by a passenger who gained access to the cockpit or by one of the pilots themselves. The first major theory focused on Captain Zahari Ahmed Shah, the experienced pilot who had commanded the flight. Some investigators began to suspect that the captain had intentionally disabled the aircraft's communication systems and deliberately crashed the plane into the remote Indian Ocean. This theory suggested that Captain Zahari might have been experiencing severe psychological distress that led to suicidal thoughts. The investigation examined his personal life, including his marriage, family relationships, and any signs of depression or mental health issues. Some investigators pointed to his passion for flight simulation and his detailed knowledge of aircraft systems as evidence that he could have executed such a complex plan. However, this theory remained highly controversial. Captain Zahari's family and colleagues defended his character, describing him as a dedicated professional who loved flying and no apparent motivation for such a devastating act. Malaysian authorities were particularly reluctant to accept this theory, as it would have represented a massive failure in their pilot screening and mental health monitoring systems. Another theory suggested that the incident resulted from a hijacking attempt, either by passengers or by external forces who had infiltrated the aircraft. The investigation into Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah intensified as investigators examined several compelling pieces of evidence. The first significant point was that the aircraft had made a dramatic 180-degree turn shortly after disappearing from radar, reversing course from its planned route to Beijing and heading back toward Malaysia. This maneuver was far too precise and deliberate to have been accomplished by the aircraft's autopilot system alone. Someone with extensive knowledge of the Boeing 777 systems would have had to manually execute this complex course change. The second crucial observation involved the aircraft's flight path after the course reversal. Analysis showed that MH370 had flown directly along the border between Thailand and Malaysia, threading through a narrow corridor between the two countries' radar coverage zones. This path appeared to be deliberately chosen to avoid detection by either nation's air traffic control systems. Only someone with intimate knowledge of regional radar coverage and flight procedures could have planned such a route. The third and most controversial piece of evidence emerged during the investigation of Captain Zahari's personal life. Investigators discovered that he had an elaborate flight simulator set up in his home, which was not unusual for professional pilots who often used personal simulators for training and recreation. However, computer forensics experts found that Captain Zahari had recently used the simulator to practice a flight path that bore striking similarities to MH370's actual route. The simulated flight showed a course that diverted from its original destination and ended in the remote Indian Ocean, eerily similar to what investigators believed had happened to the real aircraft. Despite these seemingly damning pieces of evidence, the official investigation team firmly rejected the pilot suicide theory. Several strong counter-arguments emerged during their thorough background investigation of Captain Zahari. He was universally respected as a highly experienced and seasoned pilot, with an exemplary flying record spanning over 18,000 flight hours. Colleagues, friends, and family members described him as a dedicated professional who was passionate about aviation and had never displayed any concerning behavior. The The investigation found no evidence of family problems, financial difficulties, or psychological issues that might have motivated such a devastating act. Captain Zahari appeared to be in good mental health, with stable relationships and no history of depression or suicidal ideation. Experts pointed out that pilots contemplating suicide typically leave behind some form of evidence or display warning signs in their behavior, but nothing of this nature was discovered in Captain Zahari's case. The second major theory focused on the possibility of a terrorist hijacking. This theory gained initial traction when investigators discovered that 2 passengers aboard MH370 had been traveling with stolen passports. The 2 men were Iranian nationals who had obtained fraudulent documentation to board the aircraft. One passenger was using a passport stolen from an Italian citizen, while the other carried a passport belonging to an Austrian man. Both documents had been stolen in Thailand, a known hub for passport fraud and document forgery. The discovery of these stolen passports immediately raised suspicions about potential terrorist involvement, as false documentation is often used by individuals with malicious intent. Initial investigations revealed that both men had purchased tickets for connecting flights beyond Beijing, with their ultimate destination being European cities. The mother of one of the Iranian passengers was waiting in Hamburg, Germany, expecting her son to arrive for what was supposed to be a family reunion. This suggested that the men were asylum seekers attempting to reach Europe through irregular means rather than terrorists planning an attack. Interpol conducted extensive background checks on both individuals and found no connections to terrorist organizations or extremist activities. The investigation concluded that they were simply migrants seeking better opportunities in Europe and had chosen to use stolen passports because they lacked proper documentation for legal travel. This theory was officially dismissed when authorities confirmed that the men posed no security threat and were not involved in any terrorist plot. The hypoxia theory, the ghost flight scenario. The third and most widely accepted theory among aviation experts involves a catastrophic loss of cabin pressure leading to hypoxia, or oxygen deprivation. This scenario, often referred to as the ghost flight theory, suggests that everyone aboard MH370, including the pilots, became unconscious due to lack of oxygen, while the aircraft continued flying on autopilot until it ran out of fuel. Hypoxia can occur when aircraft experience cabin decompression either through mechanical failure or gradual pressure loss through damaged seals. At cruising altitude, the air is too thin for humans to survive without pressurization systems. When these systems fail, passengers and crew have only minutes before losing consciousness. There are several ways such oxygen deficiency could have occurred aboard MH370. One possibility involves an electrical fire in the cockpit, which could have damaged multiple systems simultaneously, including the transponder and communication equipment. Electrical fires in aviation are particularly dangerous because they can spread rapidly and produce toxic smoke that further compromises the crew's ability to respond effectively. Another scenario involves a sudden mechanical failure that compromised the aircraft's pressurization system. In such cases, emergency oxygen masks would deploy automatically, but these typically provide only about 15 minutes of oxygen for passengers. This is normally sufficient time for pilots to descend to a safe altitude below 10,000 feet, where supplemental oxygen is not required. However, if the crew's oxygen supply was also compromised, or if they were overcome by toxic fumes before they could initiate emergency procedures, the aircraft could continue flying under autopilot control while everyone aboard slowly succumbed to oxygen deprivation. A typical scenario following this theory suggests that shortly after entering Vietnamese airspace, the pilots noticed some type of emergency situation, possibly smoke or system failures. Captain Zahari would have initiated a course reversal to return to Kuala Lumpur for an emergency landing. However, during this attempt to return to safety, a catastrophic event occurred that led to rapid decompression or toxic smoke filling the cabin. The crew and passengers would have quickly lost consciousness, but the aircraft's autopilot system would have continued to follow its programmed course. Military radar detected the aircraft during this phase, as it flew on autopilot in what appeared to be erratic patterns. Eventually, the autopilot system may have been programmed to turn southward, directing the aircraft over the vast Indian Ocean where it flew for hours as a ghost plane, until the fuel was exhausted and it crashed into the ocean 2,000 kilometers west of Australia. This theory has gained support from several aviation experts because it explains many of the mysterious aspects of MH370's disappearance, including the loss of communications, the course changes, and the extended flight time without any further human intervention. The mysterious nature of MH370's disappearance inevitably spawned numerous alternative theories and conspiracy speculations. Some of the more outlandish suggestions include alien abduction, claims that the US military had secretly shot down the aircraft and was covering up the incident, or theories that Russian President Vladimir Putin possessed secret knowledge about the plane's location. Other conspiracy theories suggested that a new Bermuda Triangle type phenomenon had occurred in the area, causing the aircraft to vanish without a trace. While these theories captured public imagination and generated extensive discussion on social media, they lacked any credible evidence and were dismissed by serious investigators. The Richard Godfrey Breakthrough, WSPR-NAT technology. Years after the official search operations ended, a significant development emerged that could potentially solve the MH370 mystery. In 2021, Richard Godfrey, a retired aerospace engineer and independent researcher, claimed to have discovered new evidence about the aircraft's location using innovative radio wave technology. Godfrey's approach involved using WSPR-NAT, or Weak Signal Propagation Reporter Network, a global network of amateur radio enthusiasts who transmit and receive low-power radio signals. This technology had never before been applied to aircraft tracking, but Godfrey believed it could provide crucial insights into MH370's final flight path. The WSPR-NAT system works by having radio operators around the world transmit weak signals that are received and logged by other stations globally. When an aircraft flies through these radio signals, it can create subtle disturbances or reflections that are recorded in the system's database. By analyzing these historical records from March 2014, Godfrey claimed he could reconstruct MH370's flight path with unprecedented accuracy. Godfrey combined data from multiple sources in his analysis, information from the British Inmarsat satellite that had detected MH370's communication attempts, technical specifications from Boeing about the aircraft's performance capabilities, oceanographic data from Australian researchers, and the revolutionary WSPR-NAT amateur radio technology. His analysis suggested that MH370 crashed at a location approximately 1,560 kilometers west of Perth, Australia, at coordinates 29.178850 degrees south, 99.85352 degrees east. This location was southeast of the previously calculated 7th arc, in an area that had not been thoroughly searched during the official operations. The WSPR-NAT technology is complex and involves analyzing radio wave propagation patterns, signal reflections, and frequency shifts that occur when aircraft pass through radio transmissions. While the technology itself is not new, its application to historical aircraft tracking represents a potentially groundbreaking development in aviation investigation techniques. A new breakthrough in tracking technology might finally solve the MH370 mystery. This advanced system works by catching radio wave reflections that bounce through our atmosphere. Radio waves naturally get sent out from various sources around the world, and when these waves hit the atmosphere, they create weak signals that travel to different places. When an airplane flies through the path of these radio waves, it creates a unique signature that can be detected. Think of it like how a shadow appears when something blocks light. But instead of light, we're talking about radio waves bouncing off aircraft. A researcher named Richard has spent years developing a special computer program that can read these weak radio signals and figure out exactly where planes were flying. His system is so precise that it can track flight paths even when regular radar systems fail to work. Richard's calculations point to a very specific location for MH370. He believes the missing plane sits exactly on what experts call the 7th arc. This is a curved line in the ocean that shows where the plane's last satellite signal came from. The location he has identified places the aircraft 4 kilometers deep under the ocean surface. The ocean floor in this area is not flat like many people imagine. Deep underwater, there are tall cliffs, deep valleys, and even underwater mountains called seamounts. These underwater features can easily hide a crashed aircraft, making it incredibly difficult to spot during search operations. Search teams have looked in this general area before. Australia conducted the most extensive underwater search operation in history, spending millions of dollars to comb through vast sections of the ocean floor. Despite their efforts, they came up empty-handed. However, it's entirely possible that the plane was missed during these searches, especially given the challenging underwater terrain. A second search operation was later carried out by a company called Ocean Infinity. They used more advanced equipment and better technology than the first search. But even with their improved tools, they didn't search the exact spot that Richard has identified. Richard has such confidence in his calculations that he's willing to stake his reputation on them. He claims he can pinpoint the plane's location within just 40 nautical miles. This might sound like a large area, but compared to the vast expanse of ocean that has been searched before, it's actually quite small and manageable. The proposed new search would focus only on this 40 nautical mile radius. Search teams would need to examine this area very carefully, using the most advanced underwater scanning equipment available. This targeted approach would be much more efficient than the previous massive search operations that covered thousands of square miles. This development brings real hope for solving one of aviation's greatest mysteries. For the first time in years, there's a concrete plan that could actually lead to finding the missing plane. Not everyone agrees with Richard's approach, though. Some experts question whether his methods are accurate enough to pinpoint such a specific location. They argue that radio wave analysis, while innovative, might not be reliable enough for such a precise determination. Critics worry that another failed search attempt could waste valuable resources and dash the hopes of families still waiting for answers. Richard remains confident in his work. He believes that if a new search operation starts soon, it would take only about 1 year to complete. By the end of 2022, according to his timeline, we would finally know whether the plane lies in this location or not. Richard is certain that his calculations are correct and that the plane will be found exactly where he predicts. Additional evidence supports Richard's theory through something called drift analysis. Scientists studied how ocean currents move objects through the water over time. They calculated that if a plane had indeed crashed in Richard's proposed location, pieces of the aircraft would have been carried by ocean currents to specific places around the Indian Ocean. The results of this drift analysis are encouraging. Scientists predicted that debris would wash up on Madagascar and the small islands surrounding it. This prediction has proven accurate. Over the years, 27 confirmed pieces of MH370 have been discovered on various islands across the world. These pieces match exactly with what the drift analysis suggested would happen if the plane crashed in the area Richard has identified. The fact that the drift analysis aligns so perfectly with Richard's location theory adds significant credibility to his claims. It's like having two different types of evidence that point to the same conclusion. This combination of radio wave tracking technology and ocean current analysis represents the most promising lead in the MH370 case since the plane first disappeared. Perhaps we are finally close to uncovering the truth about what happened to this missing flight and the 239 people on board. The Malaysian cabinet also just approved a fresh search for the wreckage of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 in March of 2025. This comes more than 10 years after the plane disappeared without explanation. Ocean Infinity, an exploration company, will search a 15,000 square kilometer area in the southern Indian Ocean. The agreement follows a no-find, no-fee structure, meaning the company only gets paid if they locate the wreckage. Transport Minister Loki Siu Fook announced that Ocean Infinity will receive $70 million, or £56 million, if successful in finding the aircraft remains. The government is committed to continuing the search operation and providing closure for the families of the MH370 passengers, Loki said in his official statement. Aviation experts widely believe the aircraft crashed somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean. However, the exact cause of the crash remains a mystery. Several pieces of debris thought to belong to the missing plane have appeared on Indian Ocean coastlines in the years since MH370 vanished. The families of those lost deserve answers, and the aviation industry needs to understand what went wrong to prevent similar tragedies in the future. This new evidence might finally provide the closure that has been sought for so many years.